Test, test, test. Okay, let's bring that down and... Okay, let's do this. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowsky, and today we are going to recreate another painting by another one of my favorite artists. Today, we are going to be looking at Mary Cassatt. And Mary Cassatt is one of the greatest Impressionist painters of all time. Who just so happened to be a woman, and she certainly the best American Impressionist painter of all time, as being that she was originally born in the United States. And I love this painting, and I think this is really emblematic of the kind of paintings that she was doing towards the end of her career. And you can just see the expressive brushstrokes here that go beyond what the Impressionists were doing, that go beyond the post-Impressionist painters, that goes beyond the Futurists and the Cubists and all the other avant-garde art movements that had sprung up at the very end of her life. And this is the kind of stuff that we don't really see until the 1940s, 1950s with the abstract expressionists. I mean, this Willem de Kooning is doing something not too dissimilar to this in the 1950s and being hailed as a genius. And here's Mary Cassatt doing it 50 years before. I'm in love with this artist. I'm so excited to take a second look at her, because we did a painting of hers a long time ago, maybe 2 years ago, and yeah, she's one of my favorites, as are all of these, but she's definitely maybe in the top 10. So let's get started here. We'll save all my enthusiasm for when we're in a little bit here. So this is what we're planning on doing. We're going to get some paint on the canvas. We're going to get an image on the canvas. We're going to get some paint on there. As that dries, we'll talk about the biography of Mary Cassatt. We'll do a little bit of underpainting. And the background, foreground, this painting is intended to be done pretty quickly. So one of the things that I'm going to encourage you to do is to try to paint it at the same speed and intensity as today's master, because that's also going to come through in the type of brushstrokes we paint. Now, that doesn't necessarily, when I say we're going to paint quickly, it doesn't necessarily mean the painting will be over in 25 minutes. We can work slowly, but the actual brushstrokes we paint are quick and intense, right? So, but having said that, we'll still aim to be done in about maybe 2.5 hours. We'll see how that goes. Okay, and just as a quick reminder, especially if you're watching the first time, hit the like button, notification, the subscribe button, and the notification bell. Consider joining our Facebook group, uploading your image to the Facebook group. Here it is right now, growing day by day by day. Incredible, awesome community here. Take a photograph of your work, upload it so that other people can celebrate your work, offer some feedback if that's something you want. And then once a month, I go through everything that's on there. And then we do a special feedback episode. We just did a 5-hour one on Tuesday. So it's a great way for you to also grow as an artist. Also, if you want to support the channel with a small donation, there's the PayPal link in the description below. You can use the Super Chat function right next to where you leave comments. You can also leave a $1 donation if you find it's worth the price of a cup of coffee. And you can also contact me through my email, which is on my website, or the Facebook page. Both of those links are down in the description below. So let's start. Let's get into this. Don't let me forget to just mention this incredible book that I found many of the artists, not only the last few artists we've been looking at, but a whole bunch more coming down the pipeline in the future. So we have, of course, the original image. This is what it looks like. But there's a Dropbox folder, I'll show you in a second, that has this outline, this free outline that you can download and print on your desktop printer at home, your LaserJet printer at work. It doesn't matter what kind of printer it is. They will all work. And you'll see that there's that link to the Dropbox folder. I think it's the second link perhaps down there. You'll see our basic paintings and the tools, resources for those are there. Here's the kind of the easier paintings at the very top here, and our folder is right here. But there is, you know, another 150, 200, I don't know how many folders down there of paintings that are a little bit more complex, that start with numbers as opposed to letters. So let's look into this folder. You'll see that there's 3 files. There'll be a 4th one here soon with some of my cheat sheets informations in there. But you can see there's the original image and then the 2 different outlines, the tracings. Download those, and then I'll show you what to do next. Okay, so now I've downloaded that. You can see I'm going to be painting. This is a 9x12 sized canvas board. This is one that I think are pretty good. I can't remember the name offhand, but I think they're in the a link to buy them off of Amazon is in the description below. So let's get this roughly centered. Now there is a lot of lines on here. I'm not going to paint or transfer all of those lines. To do that, I'm going to use my carbon transfer paper. You'll see that I've used this a number of times. One side's shiny, one is not shiny. I'm going to put the shiny side down because that's where the carbon or graphite is. Get that in there. And then I'm just going to quickly go around, especially the face. Her eyebrows. Her eyes. Remember, we're going to cover every one of these lines up with paint. So spending all day long getting the perfect outline won't really benefit you too much, because you'll just be so bummed about covering them all up. In fact, let me just bring up the original so that we can just see what is the most important lines here. Right, a lot of this stuff in here I'm just going to make note of, just so I can see that the kind of curving shape here. And then her hair is sort of in here. Is that enough? I'll just show you how far I went. So I'm just trying to capture where's that darker area. Like a lot of this is just sort of messiness. Yeah, I think that's probably good, right? Anything down here? Oh, there's that line. Okay, good enough. Take that off. I'm gonna keep that handy nearby. Reuse my carbon paper because I can use it I don't know, 15, 20 times, depending on how complex those drawings are. So let's go to the next step here. Okay, so now that we've got the outline on the canvas, we want to stain the canvas with a little bit of color. Those of you that have been painting with me for a while kind of know what's up here, but these are the colors that I'm about to use for this entire painting. We're going to use what we call a split primary palette, where we've got 2 yellows, 2 reds, and 2 blues, as well as white. Now, I do own black, but the great thing with using this palette is we can mix our own black very easily. Now, if you don't have this paint, don't worry. You can use different brands of paint. This is Golden. Golden's a little bit more expensive. Those are the colors that I recommend. It should work pretty well. Liquitex. There's a student and a professional grade of paint. Winsor & Newton. Artist Loft from Michael's Art Supplies. Buzz. Peebo. Holbein. Daler-Rowney. Fevicryl. Nova Color. Chromacolor. But not museum color, because they put some white in the paint, and that makes it impossible to mix our black. It also just dulls all the colors down, and I like to have more intense colors, and if I want to dull them, I want to be able to do that. I don't want the paint to force me to use it in a certain particular way. So if you're noticing that you're not able to mix a black according to the way that I show you how to do it, let me know, because that could mean that some of the other paints, maybe some that I've listed here, because I haven't had a chance to use them all, maybe you're having a similar problem too. Let me know so I can also give them a big X. Do not use, right? Okay, so as I said, we're going to use, this is the brand, I'm not sponsored or paid by. I bought all the supplies just like you at no extra special discounts or anything. And the paint I'm about to use is, we call this Azo Yellow Deep, or sorry, that's the way they call it, because as you noticed, all those brands have different names for all of their paints. That makes life really difficult, doesn't it? Why they do that, I don't know. I think sometimes people just get into the business of art supplies so that they can name them what they want. So let's, let me show you what I'm up to. I just squeezed that Azo Yellow Deep out. I'm going to put some water there. Let's put a little bit more. Okay, and then I'm going to stir that up real good. Okay. Quickly cover this whole surface with this yellow. Now, I'm not sure. We'll take a look here in a moment. We'll take a look at her painting a little bit closer. One thing the Impressionists did, which was a bit of a break from the past, is in some cases they did not apply an Imprimatura to their painting. They would just start painting directly onto the white canvas as a way, because one thing they wanted was really bright, luminous colors. And painting on white will help make those colors brighter. The thing is, though, is that they weren't using quite the same colors that we have today. You know, if Mary Cassatt walked into the studio today and looked at the paints that I got in this box here, she would be pretty amazed. She'd say, like, wow, look how bright these colors are. Where did you get these? The Impressionists were really the first generation of artists to have access to pre-mixed colors in tubes of paint. But that doesn't mean those colors were like what we have today. Yes, it made their lives a lot easier. They were brighter and more saturated than any colors that had been available to artists in the past. But you know, over the past 150 years, technology in every facet of life, including paint and color, has evolved dramatically. So I guess, yes, we could just paint directly onto a white canvas like many of the Impressionists did, but the colors they're painting were a little bit less saturated than the colors we have. So I think whereas I'm painting this yellow, and then I'm going to paint other colors on top, and so that's going to kind of mute maybe a little bit of the saturation of the colors, but I think it'll all kind of even out, right? So that we'll basically end up in about the same place. And I'm not exactly sure, but that's just sort of my guesstimate, right? Oh, there are a ton of comments in there. Let me get a little bit further into the episode, and then I'll take a little bit of a look here. Okay. So while this is drying, let's talk a little bit about who Mary Cassatt was, what makes her such a unique figure in art history. And let me get my tea out. Okay, so Mary Stevenson Cassatt, or Mary Cassatt, was born in 1844 and dies in 1926 at age 82. Lived a long and super productive life, where she, broke so many boundaries for so many artists, let alone women, that we could fill hours and hours of discussion here talking about her work. So you know that I have a difficulty with brevity, but I will do my best to try to discuss the life of this incredible artist in as concise a manner as possible. So Mary Cassatt is born in Allegheny City, Pennsylvania, which is basically now a suburb of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, also, her and Andy Warhol, I would say, are probably the two most famous sons and daughters of Pittsburgh, in the art world anyway. I'm sure there's baseball players and all sorts of other folk that come from Pittsburgh, but certainly within the art realm are the big heavyweights. And her father was a wealthy stockbroker. He was into like flipping properties, and so the family had money, and that definitely helped her throughout her career. Although, as we'll see here, he was never supportive of her as an artist, and so despite the fact that she came from this very wealthy family, he refused to at any point pay for her art supplies. He would help her with her rent, but he would not help her with her education and paying for tuition for schools. He wanted her to find a more, productive job. And so credit to her for having, basically followed her passion and her dreams despite the wishes of her father, because she would certainly have had a much easier time in life had she sort of followed the path that her father had wanted her to go down. I think this is a great quote here, because her mother was kind of the opposite to that. The quote is from one of her friends: anyone who had the privilege of knowing Mary Cassatt's mother would know at once that it was from her and her alone that Mary inherited her ability. I think that tells you right there, right? How important Mary Cassatt's mother was. Her name was Catherine. Catherine Cassatt was to supporting her daughter, encouraging her daughter, and developing her into the great master that we know today. I think it's also interesting that she was a distant cousin of Robert Henry. And Robert Henry, we did an episode where we made a painting of his, who Robert Henry has got to be the most influential art teacher in the United States, as well as the main energy behind what was called the Ashcan movement of art, which was a very important movement in America, well, kind of early 20th century art history. Let's see. Being a family that was relatively wealthy, they did a lot of traveling. Which would have been very unique for anyone at this particular time when she's born in 1844. So she's travels throughout the United States, goes to Europe with her family, London, Paris, Berlin, Amsterdam, and it's during those occasions while she's, in her, 9, 10, 11 years old, where she's going to these great art museums in Europe and seeing the art of all of these incredible artists in person. And one of the kind of major events in her life is the World's Fair in 1855 in Paris. And it's in that World's Fair where she first sees the art of many of the great French artists of the time, including Ingres, Delacroix, Corot, Courbet, who are all these sort of titans of 19th century, early 19th century painting. Artists who had been followers of Jacques-Louis David and the neoclassical movement, which had been really big in the early 1800s. And neoclassicism was all about painting relatively, I don't want to say photorealistic, but realistic paintings of mostly humans, enacting scenes from both the Bible as well as scenes from Greek and Roman history, because neoclassicism was going back to the art of Rome, or ancient Rome and ancient Greece, and trying to take some of the styles and techniques of those great artists and kind of adapt them for contemporary audiences. Part of that had to do is, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, you have like Napoleon going on all of these wars of conquests around Europe as well as North Africa into Egypt, and seeing the, opening up the Great Pyramid. And so all of this, so kind of early 1800s is sort of awash with all of this great art from the past being brought back to life, which had been sort of ignored for centuries, and if not just sort of buried and left kind of forgotten. So all of that was happening. These artists that were her kind of early influences were those artists who were most captivated by that ancient Greek and Roman art. Other people that were in that exhibition was Degas and Pissarro, two of the important older artists who later become the Impressionists, or really form kind of part of the core of the Impressionist art movement. So she sees this exhibition when she's 11 years old in Paris, being this young American girl from a gritty town called Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that must have just blown her mind, seeing, because there were some art museums in the United States. I'm sure she would have seen them in her travels to maybe Buffalo and to New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, but certainly nothing at the time that equaled what was going on, or what you could see in Europe. Now, of course, over the the next 50, 60 years in the early 1900s, you have a lot of wealthy American industrialists who snap up all of the available work in private collections of some of these great artists and bring them to Washington, D.C., and they become part of the National Gallery collection and the Metropolitan Museum in New York. But it's really, she sees this art in Europe, and a couple things happen. One is it really sets her on the path to becoming an artist. And secondly, it really focuses her attention to living in Europe and moving away from the United States, which she eventually does. So she starts studying at the Pennsylvania Academy of Art in Philadelphia at the age of 15. Again, this is now where she starts really running into clashes with her father, who's not keen on this this interest, which has been, you know, growing and growing and growing until now she's a little bit older and starting to make choices for herself, and decides that she wants to move away from the family home from Pittsburgh, goes to Philadelphia, and she's now immersed in art school. And you know, you can imagine her being very young to start that education, and it's understandable that her father and mother might be a little concerned about this young girl kind of off on her own, kind of studying with much older students. And you know, there's art school is a bastion of liberal thinking, and one of the things that her father's concerned about is her falling in with the wrong crowd of these hipster bohemian artists, and kind of deviating into this life of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, basically. Which is probably not too far from what actually ended up happening. She's in school throughout the entire American Civil War. One of her kind of early teachers is Thomas Eakins. Or Akins? Thomas Akins? Eakins? I don't think I've ever said his name out loud now that I think about it. He is certainly one of the most important American artists of this time. I'd like to do an episode on him. He's also, much of his work is also technically quite complex, so it's just a matter of finding the right piece. But I think that also says something, that she's already in that, in the vortex of really one of a really important American artist. But you know, it's kind of interesting, her just talking about the difficulties of being a young woman, being a young person, but then being a young woman in art school, and how so many of the opportunities that were available to the men were not available to her. So while all of the men are painting nude women, all of the women are in a different room painting old plaster casts of Greek and Roman sculptures, Michelangelo's David, the winged, what's the famous one in the Louvre, the headless woman with the giant wings from ancient Greece. Anyway, a lot of those were cast into plaster, and then a lot of old art schools around the world, whether it be like the Royal Academy in London or the Pennsylvania School of Art in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, Cooper Union in New York, where I went to school, have these ancient sculptures that were cast into plaster that are just now, you know, in the hallways, or in, you know, they're covered in under tarps and blankets and storage, which, you know, were cast directly from the original things. It's making them, like, I think, extremely valuable artworks in of their own. But anyway, so the women are forced to paint these ancient sculptures, which is not really a bad thing. I mean, that would be, I think, I would love it if my students at Emily Carr, the university I teach at now, had the opportunity to study from those kinds of things. But it would have been a pretty tough pill to swallow to be doing that while all of your colleagues that you would see as equal are in another room working directly from life and painting nude women, right? And it's not like the women are in another room painting nude men, right? That's even more ridiculous to possibly comprehend. Anyway, so, you know, she says, like, there was no teaching, right? It was just like the boys are getting all of the opportunities, and this becomes sort of, again, and we've talked about this over and over and over again whenever we look at women artists, female artists, of like the difficulty that many of them, all of them had when they were studying, if they were allowed to study in any way at all. And I guess that's, again, it makes it that much more remarkable that an artist like Mary Cassatt or Marie Bracquemond, Artemisia Gentileschi, we go, you know, Frida Kahlo, Emily Carr, all these great artists throughout history who, I mean, it just shows how passionate they were about art, right? It just shows, like, if they were willing to constantly be facing all of these hurdles and yet continue making art, it's, you know, it just shows like the power of art and how intense, once it grabs hold of you, it's hard to let it go, right? Or it's impossible to let it go. Anyway, after she finishes, or she didn't graduate from the program, there's no diploma or anything, she leaves the school. She's just so frustrated with, she has these greater ambitions for herself. And you know, women at the time, you know, when they go to art school, it's mostly seen as just sort of keeping these young girls busy until they get married, and then they're going to be occupied raising the kids, and then, you know, they're forgotten about, right? It's sort of like, well, we'll teach them a little bit of painting, we'll do a little bit of needlecraft here, we'll show them how to, you know, do a little ceramics, and then, you know, but without really the possibility or hope of them actually having an actual career in any of those fields, right? So she decides that she's going to move to Paris, and which again, her and her father quarrel about, because her father is not into this idea of her leaving home at the age of 22, moving overseas, going to another art school or studying art again. It's like, seriously, let's move on from this stupid art thing. Why don't you just find a nice young man and get married, and then you could do a little bit of painting in the garden in your spare time. Like, just come on, Mary, let's grow up already, right? Credit to her mother, who comes with her to Paris and kind of goes back and forth, who helps her settle in. She writes a bunch of letters to different artists, French artists who have studios. Of course, there's the École des Beaux-Arts, but at the time they don't allow women to study there. So you would have to instead study with another artist who has a studio, a private studio, where you could go and take one-on-one classes, or they might have 5 students in their you know, in their studio, and you could kind of study with them, which is a very different experience than going to art school. But you know, I was probably not the worst thing that could have ever happened to her, because she's now having, like, you know, a real you know, kind of like a one-on-one experience with various different really successful artists along the way, and that would have also helped her build a rapport with some of these artists, and sort of help increase her not notoriety, but her name and face around art circles, because she was excelling from a fairly young age. So, you know, when all these artists, these guys, because she's of course having to study from men, are gathering around in these cafes and talking about things, her name would come up as like, yeah, I got this one student. She's a woman, by the way, but she's doing pretty good for a woman, right? Because the other thing too is, so another thing that Mary Cassatt does is she starts painting at the Louvre, and we've looked at a number of other artists who happen to be women who had that that job or that opportunity to go into the Musée du Louvre and to do reproductions of many of the famous artworks there. So that's something you can still see to this day, artists painting in museums. You can do that in museums here in North America. It's just very uncommon. A lot of artists don't jump through the necessary hoops to do it. But it's also beyond just having the opportunity to study a famous painting right up close and to reproduce it. It's also really the one of the only ways that young female artists can socialize with male artists, at least in Europe at this particular time, because they're not allowed in the art schools. So you also have male artists who are painting paintings in the Louvre. So and there's many sort of situations where young women sort of, it's like the closest thing you might have to a singles bar for artists back in the day, right? Because you might find yourself shoulder to shoulder painting a painting next to a handsome young man, and that indeed happened to one of her good friends. Elizabeth Jane Gardner became the wife of William Adolphe Bouguereau. Bouguereau is another very famous painter from this particular time, although he would have been, I'm sure, a little bit much older than her friend. Anyway, what else do I want to talk about on this time? One of the things also, shortly 1868, so she's, 24 years old, a couple of her artworks are accepted into the Paris Salon. And that is a big deal for any artist of the time, because the Salon is kind of the gatekeepers for professional art in Paris. In this case, there's a Berlin Salon, a Salon in London, and everywhere in Europe would have these academies that either once a year or both in the spring and fall would have these big exhibitions, and they would jury them. Hundreds and hundreds of artists would submit 2, 3, 5 artworks at a time, and maybe all 5 or one of them are accepted, and they're hung salon style, frame to frame, floor to ceiling, and you have all these wealthy people come in and they're looking at paintings on the ceiling with their binoculars, and then buying some of them sometimes. But without being accepted into the Salon, selling your artwork is very difficult, because the first question a collector would ask is like, oh, so how many of your paintings have you had on display at the Salon? Oh, none. Ooh, well, I have to go to my next appointment, right? And then they're off. So that the stamp of approval from the Salon is hugely important to artists at the time. And it's because of the power of the Salon that you have a group of young or middle-aged artists who have been submitting work year after year after year, and either getting maybe one painting accepted every year, every second year, or none, who get more and more fed up with this system that had been in place for maybe 300 years. And that group of young artists is the artists that eventually come together to form the movement known as Impressionism. Some of those early artists, Gustave Courbet, Edouard Manet, and then of course Claude Monet, Camille Pissarro, Edgar Degas, are all of these artists who are doing work that is really pushing the boundaries of what is acceptable to the Salon. And the Salon, the people that jury the Salon, are from that old guard of neoclassical artists, the artists that Mary Cassatt had been great admirers of back in the day. But they have a very different approach to what the Impressionists are painting. They are looking at ancient Greek and Roman art and making paintings that have this air of classical stoicism, and there's kind of like a rigidity to them, which is appreciated by those artists, because everything sort of looks like noble statues and propaganda for for a certain kind of way of life and that of order and rational thought, etc. So the Impressionists kind of come on the scene, and they're sort of questioning this, not just the approach to painting, but really a lot of the values that underlie not only the art that the salon is hanging, but the salon itself. And Courbet is one of the first to really reject the salon. One of the things Gustave Courbet does is he mounts his own exhibition in a building right next door to the salon, and he's cranked out like hundreds of paintings over the course of a couple of years, and had his own exhibition of his own paintings hung salon style. It must have been the craziest, like I can't even think of how that is even possible. But that was a hugely successful exhibition in which thousands and thousands of people from all over Paris and elsewhere around Europe came to see, because they're like, how did this one person fill up like a gymnasium full of artwork on his, like, how is that possible? But that starts to show the cracks in there, right? And of course the old guard starts getting kind of nervous, because what's going on? Like, we can't let these people succeed, because then where does our authority go? And Mary Cassatt, who is clearly frustrated with the patriarchal system that had been in existence, and her inability to push through that, finds the Impressionists to be kindred spirits who they're on the same side, right? Yes, they're men, and of course they're not all, they're maybe as evolved as we might like them to have been from today's standards, but certainly way more open-minded than the old guard. And so she falls in with that group. And one of the artists, actually, maybe before I jump too far ahead, okay, we'll get back to, we'll come back to this story in a second, because there is a little brief interlude where she returns from Paris, and she moves back to the United States, just outside of Chicago, during the Franco-Prussian War. So there's this war that erupts in Europe in the 1870s, and it's sort of, everything's chaotic, just as it's happening right now in Ukraine. And so so she flees back to the United States, and she tries to make a go of it back in the States, but she finds it even more difficult to make a living as an artist, as a female artist in the United States. It's not really happening. So she writes here, July 1871, "I have given up my studio and torn up my father's portrait, and have not touched a brush for 6 weeks, nor ever will again until I see some prospect of getting back to Europe. I'm very anxious to go out west next fall and get some employment, but I have not yet decided where." So that, just that little tidbit here, she's talking about a portrait she did of her father, right? So there's this whole story of her making a portrait of her father, trying to kind of show him that she has grown, and that she's been somewhat pretty successful considering the obstacles against her, and she's going to give it to her father, but again, he's rejects. He's going to pay for her supplies, or he's going to pay for her to stay in the United States, but he's not going to pay for any supplies, and he's certainly not going to pay for her to get on another boat and go back to Europe. So, it's like, so she cuts up the portrait. She's like, screw this guy. Like, thanks for the help, Dad. Another thing that happens is the Great Chicago Fire. She loses a bunch of her artwork. Imagine just it's getting more and more frustrating and depressing for this poor woman. But she does get this commission to go back to Europe, to go to Parma, Italy, and make some copies of a couple paintings by Correggio for a church back in Pittsburgh. So the church pays for her trip, buys her some supplies, and that is a huge turning point. Like, it's, you can just imagine that it's like she's at the depths, the lowest depths possible, and then this commission just sort of arrives out of nowhere, and boom, she's super excited. She returns back to Europe, and she makes these paintings, makes everybody happy, and she starts making a name for herself in Italy and then in Spain. What else? And she's submitting some paintings to, again, the salons, but she falls back in with that impressionist group of artists who are becoming more and more hostile to the salon system. And one of the things that is suggested to her is like, well, Mary, if you want to get your paintings into the salon, you may want to use a little bit of your charm to influence some of the judges and maybe show a little bit of leg or whatever, and a little bit of ankle, and maybe that will impress some of the judges. And she's like, no, that's disgusting. I'm going to succeed on my merits or not at all. And she sort of pays a little bit of the price for that. She continues steadfast in her desire to be accepted and her work to be accepted as it is. One of the artists who sort of takes her under her wing is Edgar Degas, one of these artists that she had seen on display way back in 1855 at the Paris World's Fair. She had seen some of her works there. He is now one of the main drivers of the Impressionist movement, sees the potential in her, and the two of them then form this lifelong friendship together and spend much of the next few decades painting shoulder to shoulder, side by side. And that has got to be one of the most incredible, can you just imagine being a fly on the wall with Degas and Cassatt side by side? So of course there's all sorts of rumors and innuendo about this relationship. Was it beyond a platonic relationship? It's generally considered that there was no hanky-panky going on behind the scenes. Him being a little bit older than her at the time, he would have been in his 50s, she in her mid-30s, early 30s. So again, we don't really know, but it's generally believed that Degas was maybe not capable of doing engaging in certain activities. So nevertheless, they are great friends. They do have a bit of a falling out. That is not, we're not really sure exactly why. They started working on this big project together to make a kind of a portfolio of prints, and she had been, both of them were really focused on creating this kind of set of prints of their work and this big book, and he kind of backs out of it, and because he backs out of it, the project collapses. But throughout that time, they still are on friendly terms even until he passes away. Let me see. I thought it would be just interesting. This is the studio where she lives in the late 1870s, 1800s. This is Paris. The Musée du Louvre is right down here. Here's the Seine River. And right up the street, right here, is where her studio is. I wonder if there's a plaque or anything up there. Let's just see if we can... Where did it go? Of course I'm going Not sure. Maybe it's a building that's no longer in existence. Just seeing if there's a plaque or anything, but it isn't. I always just think it's kind of neat to see these environments and just think, wow, this great artist was right here. Oh, if I remember, there is a couple great restaurants right up here. Anyway, yeah, okay. Let's, I'm gonna start getting hungry. Maybe, well, just as we kind of, before I move on, I want to show you a couple things. One of which is... I don't want to download that. I want to... So this is a portrait of a maid, a African American woman who worked in the family home because, again, they're a wealthier family. But she'd originally painted her father's portrait down there, and then flipped the painting upside down and made this portrait of this woman. When she moved, she gave the picture to the woman. That's why it still exists. But, you know, that sort of says something, you know, especially would have been quite meaningful back in the day for her to choose to paint a woman of color on the same portrait as her father, and not actually cover it up. Like, that would be one thing. To leave it exposed upside down would be just an extra little knife in his gut there. Like, I'm not even going to cover it up. I want everybody to know that I started your portrait and I didn't finish it, and then I'm going to paint someone who's not white on the other, up in the upside down thing, right? I think when I look at that, I'm like, woo, ouch, that's a scorcher, right? Because I think there's a lot going on in that moment. Anyway, we can see from some of these earlier paintings the influence of the neoclassical artists and this sort of much more academic way of painting. And then as she goes, things start getting looser and looser and more expressive. Like, we start seeing stuff back here, 1876, where she's really starting to become, like, it's almost like what we see in the painting we're about to work on here. You know, in the late 1870s, early 1800s is really where, you know, I think it's 1877 where her and Degas start painting together. And some of these, you know, this is the painting we did a couple of years ago together. You know, there's some very famous Degas paintings that are made of people looking at sitting in the balcony watching ballet and opera performances, and you know, you can see Mary Cassatt was probably one of the people that would have been sitting right next to Degas, sketching shoulder to shoulder with him. As we go here, I mean, this right here is about as, if this wasn't signed by Mary Cassatt, this is right out of Degas' sketchbook, right? This is shows the influence of Degas right there. Of course, you know, one of the things you'll notice as we scroll through all of these images is that 80% of them are of women and children, often, because that's one of the only things that women are allowed to do, is to paint portraits of other women and children, because they're not allowed to paint paintings of men, or they're allowed to paint paintings of men, but they're not allowed to do the to paint paintings like history painting is on top. History, then landscape, then would it be portrait and still life, or still life and portrait? I can't remember. There is literally a hierarchy of different types of art that artists are allowed to paint, and of course women aren't allowed to go to the top level there, right? What else do I want to show here? You know, you can also see the influence of another artist like Renoir, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, who was another very important impressionist that I didn't speak about. I do just want to show you this book. Where did I put it now? Oh, right under here. Just because, you know, I was flipping through this book the other day as I was getting ready for today's episode, and just some of the paintings by Mary Cassatt in here, of course I didn't bookmark them, so let me see. Here's a few here. So this is Berthe Morisot, whose artwork we painted a few weeks ago. But you can see how, the two of them became very good friends. Berthe Morisot, Mary Bracquemond, and Eva Gonzalez are the only three women who are allowed to exhibit with the Impressionists. But you can see the similar sort of the looseness of the way that these paintings are created, which is just so remarkable. That level of confidence. I think it must be, if you're not allowed to participate in, the big party, you start to just, that kind of in some ways gives you a lot of freedom to sort of just do whatever you want to do. A bunch of Berthe Morisots. Where's some these amazing? There's a whole chapter here on like childhood, because so many of these women were basically, it's either women or children is what they're painting. Oh, of course. Okay, here's another Mary Cassatt painting. This is a portrait of an elderly lady in a bonnet, red background, 1877. It's just like, that is just wild. I mean, it kind of reminds me of Toulouse-Lautrec from the famous artist who spent a lot of time at the Moulin Rouge, but just even more, just so loose, the confidence. Of course, there's of course the other very famous Mary Cassatt. Oh, goodness, I should have been on top of it earlier. There's this one painting in here that just blew my mind. Okay, we're going to start this episode here in a second here. Start painting here. There's another Mary Cassatt painting, not the one I'm thinking of. But again, just look how loose these paintings are. I wish, it's not easy to get yourself to a point where you're allowing yourself to be that expressive. Okay, I can't find it, but there is more of them that I couldn't find online. Okay, so let's move on to the next step here. I'm sure everyone is ready to make a painting. So, do we need to do an underpainting? Let's just think about this. So, typically an underpaint, there's two different common ways people think of underpainting. One is to basically literally just do what I would consider like my first and second pass on the foreground and background, or my first pass on the background and foreground. Other artists would consider just kind of doing a little bit of the initial drawing with paint. So that's usually the way that I kind of take that for our purposes. I think it would be beneficial for us to do that. Now, probably if I was to paint this painting off camera, I would just attack this painting with paint. But my fear is that might be just a bridge too far for many people watching. I've classified this as one of our easier paintings, so I don't want to lose everybody right off the top here. So we'll mix a little bit of a darker color, and then we'll apply that as an underpainting here. So let's get my paint out real quick. Okay, so again, we have 2 yellows, 2 blues, 2 reds. This is our split primary palette. And this is going to allow us to mix every single 95% of every color that an artist could possibly mix. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mix, let's see, a dark color. What would be an appropriate, in fact, maybe it's just worth just taking a second to do a little bit of a deep look at this and see if we can uncover anything about this. You know, now I look at this, I think she's painted. At first I thought maybe she's painting on a gray piece of paper, but this is a canvas, and this is a gray canvas, and nobody makes gray canvas, so it's been painted gray. So, what's the best way for us to go forward? We need to paint a gray. Should we do... Okay, so yes, let's... Okay, so if I was to do this painting from scratch, off camera, on my own, what I would probably do is... Let's actually get these side by side. What I would do is I would probably apply this warm yellow. I wouldn't even do any of these lines on here. I'd apply a warm yellow to kind of just imbue it with some warmth. Then I would paint the gray over top of it. And then I'd mix it looks like kind of this orange is maybe what she's possibly using. And then paint the underpainting with that orange over top of it. Without any lines, because I think she's just painting this directly from life. This might be, you know, a friend of hers. Mary Cassatt never married, nor did she ever have children. So let's make our... I'm going to paint my underpainting now. Then we're going to paint it gray over top, which is going to cause a lot of my pencil lines to disappear. So what I want to do is I'm going to start by mixing a black. I'm going to take my cool blue, my cool yellow, and mix a green, and take my warm red. Now I'm not so concerned about getting a perfect black here. In fact, would it benefit to make it a little bit of a green or a purple? Let's put a little bit more red here. Oh, you know, since I'm going to make a gray, let's make a bigger mixture of this. So yeah, I think I will try to get a bit more of a black. Okay. So let's take this. Where does that come from? Where does this paint come from? Oh, probably from my palette. Okay. Sometimes you're like, what is going on? So my goal here is just to paint something in here so that I'll be able to see these lines through the gray paint. So even if there's a little bit of texture because it's a little bit thicker, that can also make it easier for you. Okay, we'll get this hat. Okay, so that's the extent of the underpainting that I'll do. Oh, Pascal's using a Peebo gray canvas. Interesting. That painting from a neutral color is probably a great idea for portraits too, in that it will allow you to kind of then just focus very clearly on lightening and darkening, because now you've got your middle value already established. So I'm going to blow dry that really quickly. Okay. So let's mix a gray now. Maybe I'll do this right here. I need to clean this studio up so bad. I think that's going to be part of my Christmas break here, is organizing this space. Is that going to be too much white? We'll think about it. Let's mix it up and start painting it. Okay, so I'm going to take my... Let's see if my black that I mixed, let's mix this into my white. Now, one thing I do is I notice that this is a little bit more on the purpley side. So I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to that. Let's get a bit more. And that's going to take some of the purpleness out of that color and make it more neutral. How gray do we need to make it a bit more gray, don't we? Let's get darker. In fact, since I'm going to add some matte medium, I'm going to make it a little bit darker than it needs to be. Gosh, it's still not quite dark enough. Wow. It's because I had so much white in there. So let's just take a little bit more of each of these colors. A little bit purpley. Let's take a bit more yellow. Just a little bit more on the blue side, isn't it? Okay. And then, goodness gracious, what did... Okay. I'm going to take some of my matte medium here. I'm putting this matte medium here just to thin it out because there's a lot of white, and painting all that white over top of this picture will just obliterate the initial drawing as well as my Imprimatura. So putting a bit of that white in there is just going to make it a little bit more transparent. Okay. Got to work kind of quickly here because it's drying already. So what's happening is, as I'm doing this, paint that's already kind of on there is starting to kind of dry, and I'm kind of pulling it off the painting. Now, worst comes to worst, if there's some areas that are kind of semi-transparent and I'm not happy with them, I'll just cover them up with a very conveniently placed brushstroke, right? Especially in a painting like this where it's kind of appears to be a little bit messy in the background. Let's see, how close did we get that color? Not bad. It's maybe just a little bit more purple, but pretty good. Good enough for government work, as my grandfather always used to say. That is like the funniest thing. When I was a kid, you know, like 6 years old, and your grandfather's saying stuff, you're like, what does that even mean? I remember saying to my parents, like, Grandpa says this, and my dad would just laugh. Yep, that's your grandfather. Okay. So that does look really dark, but I'm going to hit it with the blow dryer, and we're going to see some of the face reappear, or at least I can see it. Maybe it just barely shows up on camera, but that's the benefit of doing a little bit of that outlining on that initial stage there. Okay, so let's just mute this. Wow, Lolly says, went to the hospital last night again, to the veterinary hospital. Went on a walk and her dog ended up ripping his paw and claw off. Bloodbath, nightmare, all is well though. Oh my goodness. The whole claw? Oh. Yikes. Things happening to pets and children is the worst. Okay, I think let's go to another step here. Okay, so I should have put one of these signs up for background pass number 1, which was this gray. I've totally forgot until I was blow drying it, but you know, essentially this background is relatively straightforward, that is, this gray is our background. And so instead we're now going to go just to the foreground and paint the face over top of this. Now you'll see that as I blow dried it, some of this got a little bit more transparent, and I see a little bit of that yellow coming through. It looks a little bit streaky. Now, would it be nice if it was a fully unified surface? Sure. If I did, however, put another coat of gray over top of here, I would obliterate. I mean, I can't see any of my pencil lines to begin with now, but I would barely be, if I probably wouldn't be able to see any of the face at all. Now, of course, I could do another transfer. The one thing that happens, though, is if you try doing this again, first of all, you won't ever be able to line it up back to the original, so things are going to be a little bit jumbled, which could cause you a little bit of confusion. The other thing is that, should I even show you? What can happen is that this carbon paper can kind of stick to the surface, and then you might get, depending on how dry this is, it could kind of tear, or you might get kind of areas of kind of black. Let's just see. I mean, I'm not going to be able to line this back up, but what part of this could I do just to see if I can replicate a bad scenario here. Let's see, that's kind of down there. All right, so of course it probably will go all right here, but we'll see. Not bad. I have done this in the past where this kind of stuck to the surface. So maybe if you're just going very quickly, it doesn't cause quite as much harm. But anyway, I'm just going to continue painting, even though I can still see where my eyes are, and so they're there. I don't think it shows up on camera very well, though. So, you know, I was hoping this would stick and I could show you what not to do. Of course, when I want a problem to happen, the problem won't happen. Problems only happen when you don't want them to happen, right? Okay. So let's start painting this face here. Let's dive right into it. Let's bring it up and just think, where should we begin, and where did she begin, more importantly? So as I said, I think she might be, well, let's see, I'm trying to, what color did she begin this with? Is it, I wonder, is it this really electric orange? Or is it a blue? I mean, my instinct would be say blue or brown, but I don't know. She's kind of covered up. The reason why it seems, why, so my instinct would be to say, well, it should be blue or kind of a brown, because that's what most artists would do. But I can't, but I'm surprised I don't see any blue defining her shoulders, which would be, because I'm imagining her painting this directly from life, and she's got that color on her brush. She's got her gray canvas, and she's just standing there. Let's say there's the child there, and she's got her paint, and she's just sketching this face out. Looking, okay, let's get, we're doing the eye now, etc. And if she had that color, when she got down to, she would have outlined where those shoulders are. And since I don't see that, I see like a little bit of this brown down here. I see a bit of brown up here. So I think it's safe to say she probably used a brown to do what we might consider to be an underpainting layer. So let's mix a warm brown to do this. So let's take our warm yellow and our warm red and mix that together. It's not the darkest brown that she's using here, so we want to just, if the more blue we put into this mixture. So I got my warm yellow, my warm red, and my warm blue here. That's pretty good. So let's take our brush and let's see if we can paint back basically our underpainting lines on top of this gray surface. It might also help to refer to this as well. So I can't really see all the details, but I can see enough to help me get this painting started here. Where's the other nostril? Let's put it there. I'm not sure if it's in the right place or not. Okay. So it's not so important to me that I've got everything perfectly placed. As long as I got that, I think that's good enough. I see Nikki says, I don't have the skill and level yet, or this skill and level yet. I'm trying a lot of colors to get some of it. Or there's some early ones. Nikki says, this is one of my big problems, to try to find out in the photo which color is closest to be used. My question is, how do you know? I mean, this perception, please. I don't have this skill level yet, and I'm trying a lot of colors to get some of it. Okay, good question. How do you look at a painting and deduce which colors are the right colors to use? Like, doing it from reality is one thing, doing it from a painting is another. I think it's a little bit easier to work from a painting because the artist has already been there, done that, and sort of looked at the whole range of colors available to us in the world and made some choices. So I think that's why, one of the reasons why I teach by looking at these great artists is that already simplifies things. Painting from life is a whole other bag that takes a whole another decade to kind of perfect. So that's why I think studying from another artist is very useful. Let's say if we bring up this painting here, how is it that I'm just sort of like a detective looking at this and then trying to just deduce, how it was constructed, which, I'm looking through the layers of paint, trying to find what is the first few colors on here. And as I said, I think it's the brown because I see her using that to do some of the outlines as I've done here myself. If it had been a different color, I think we would have seen, this here would have been blue or orange or green or red. But since that's not, and I didn't do her shoulder, that tells me that this is probably brown. How do I know which kind of brown to mix? How do I mix those colors? Well, the next thing I ask myself is it in the foreground or is it in the background? If it's in the background, then I want to use a combination of cool colors to paint that area, because cool colors recede, they go backwards in space, versus warm colors appear to advance towards the viewer, towards the surface of the painting, right? So in this case, we've got these cool, well, this is kind of a neutral gray because we used cool blue, cool yellow, and warm red, so it's kind of neutral. It's neither in the background or foreground, it's just sort of in the middle. So because we don't really have that much of a background, it's not like we have mountains or anything here. This works really well for just sort of being underneath, if we think of it like the surface, like this gray is sort of like the surface of the ocean. If we wanted something cooler, we would put something underneath and it would kind of go below that surface. But everything's sort of sitting on the ocean and above here, all of this painting. So anyway, it tells me that going forward, the only colors I'm really going to be using are my three warm colors, my warm yellow, my warm red, and my warm blue. Because everything here is on top of this neutral gray, so they're all advancing towards this. Does that answer your question? I'm trying to think. I might have made it sound too simple. Lolly says, Nikki, I have seen people use color checker tool, basically taking a smudge of paint on a piece of card and holding it beside the reference to see if it's a match. Yeah, you could do that. Yeah, I mean, one of another tool. I do have some links in the description below. I'm just wondering if it's going to be helpful or confusing to show that. Maybe I'm just going to focus on well, let's rather than me trying to explain it, let's just do it, and I'll just, as I'm going here to sort of explain how I'm mixing the colors as we go, right? So let's take a look at this painting and think of what would be the next step here. Well, I think there's a few places where we could start. We could go right to this background and paint the hat. I think it's a hat, right? Like maybe some big sun hat. We could start there because it's the furthest thing in the background, so often I start there, and then I work my way forward. It would be that or the face would be the first two things. And it does look like she has started with a kind of some darker blues underneath this and then built on top of it, which might explain why we've got some of these purples and blues elsewhere. And we do see a little bit of blue in these eyes. So I think what she's doing is establishing, like we call it, like the zones of color in the face, and applying, which is probably it comes from her academic training. So she's sort of building up, these different kinds of bands of warmth and coolness on the face. And rather than me trying to describe that, if you can bear with me, I want to see if I can find, I don't think I have the book here. There's a great James Gurney book. What is it called? Oh, it's going to drive me crazy. James Gurney's... Okay, one second. I just have to do a little search on my computer, because... Okay, here it is. Let me see if I can find the original page. So this is what I saw somebody took James Gurney's image here. So let me even share with you the cover to this book. James Gurney is like, I did a whole episode on James Gurney. So this is a great book here. I've talked about it before. We did a whole episode on James Gurney. But what James Gurney is, he's alive and working today. He's a YouTuber like myself, so you certainly should subscribe to him and watch him paint. But he's a great resource for artists to look at. And one of the things that he talks about here, this is actually from his blog, is just the different zones of color in the face. And this is from his book, where he's just talking about how you might want to organize the different zones of the face. And we've got here on the bottom this blue, green, gray color. In the middle we have kind of a bit warmer reds, and in the top a little bit more yellow. And if we look at this painting, it almost looks like that's what she's done here, is got this kind of grayer color underneath. It's harder to see the warmth under here and then the yellow on the forehead, but you can really see how much more kind of grayish and bluish, greenish this zone of the face is. So anyway, that's where I'm going to start. Let's start mixing this color. So what we'll do is we'll mix a skin tone, and then we're going to add a little bit of gray to it to just sort of mute it, because often this bottom of the face, there's less light that's hitting it anyway. So where's my paintbrush that I want to use? Let's use this one. So let's put these side by side here. So I'm going to take my warm yellow. I'm going to take my warm red, less of it. Otherwise it's going to be too orangey. Take a bit more yellow. And then I'm going to take some blue. We don't need a lot of it. I put blue into that color. Might have put just a bit much, we'll see. So this is where we're going to start. Now we're going to take some white and mix white into this color. Now, what she's done is this very classical approach to painting, in which I'm going to take a bit of this gray and a little bit of blue and mix this in. So I've got this kind of, it's still a skin tone, but it's a bit more muted. And I'm going to paint this into this sort of zone. Face. Looks like she went even a little bit darker here. Let's put a bit more blue in there. She's also using this for some of the darker sides. Let me just wipe my brush off. I'm even just gonna give it a little clean. And let's mix another skin tone here. So we'll take some white. Let's take a little bit more red. This is a little bit more extreme. I shouldn't have put so much red in there, but and then I'm going to take a bit more yellow. Creating these kind of zones on the face, right? And then I can also just take a bit of this color . And then I'll go back to my gray. Should be zooming in here, sorry. Okay, so it's, you know, it looks kind of silly right now, but that's what we want. We want it just to kind of get this whole process started. She's also taken a bit of, let's say, some white and blue, mixed that. In fact, maybe even a little bit more bluish. I could almost imagine a bit more. Okay, maybe. A bit under there. Okay. Let's zoom out, because I think that's good enough for that stage. I'm going to mix, we've got our brown, but I might need to mix a little bit of a different one. I'm not going to bother cleaning my brush because it's okay. There's not too dark. Let's take some of this brown. Oops, sorry. So, I'm taking this color, maybe just a little bit of white. Kind of want that golden color. And then I'm going to kind of paint quickly here. I'm even going to take a bit of my cool yellow and mix this into here. It's almost like she's just wiping her brush. Not sure what she's building down there, but I'm going to take some more of this brown, just get a bit of that on here. See her chin. Okay, the next thing I want to do is I want to get that bit of that orangey color. So I'm going to take my red, yellow, a bit of white. Warm yellow, warm red, and warm white. Get a bit of white on my brush without mixing it. Oops, that's a bit intense, isn't it? You can see it's hard to not fill it all in. Like, I already feel like I went too far up here. It's pretty hard to show that level of restraint. Okay. Okay, let's get a few more of these colors, these blues and electric greens, emerald greens in there. So we've got some cool blue making an appearance. Just a little bit of white in there. We'll put, that's a bit of a green in here. Now we'll take our cool yellow and some white. You notice how I didn't mix it all up. I left it on my brush in a sort of semi-mixed state. Ah, didn't quite get it right. in the bottom right corner. We just have white and blue. Take a rag and just wipe a bit of that off. It's kind of just dirty paint. Okay. Nikki says, I always try to look at everyone, but you know it's hard. A lot of videos I suddenly lost one or another. Sorry, so many questions, teacher, and thank you all for your help. I don't mind. I don't mind. My whole goal here is to help people and help problem solve for people and answer questions. So I'm happy. It helps me think too. Sometimes there are things that, you know, I think with anything, sometimes we know things, but we don't know how we know them or how to explain them. So sometimes being asked those questions forces me to think about, like, well, how is it that I know that? And you're like, I don't know. It's somewhere in here. Pascal says, it's color matching challenge. Being more comfortable with colors will help a lot, Nikki. When matching colors, you aim to match hue, chroma, and value. One off will feel off. Practice mixing. Nikki says, yes, I try to practice almost always so I don't forget small details. I am self-taught and I learn everything by myself. Pascal says, by practice mixing, mean the color exercise. Take one paint, experiment adding a little bit of color. Little more, a little more, a little more. Each one, see what happens with white or another color. Pascal says, I'm sure there's shortcuts, but it's not sure thing or long term. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that until it's you're either on one side of the fence or the other. And for me, it was like I would watch people mix paint and just be like, how? I don't get it. And then I started doing it, and then all of a sudden you just find yourself on the other side of the fence. And I don't know how I got here. You just start doing it. It's a familiarity with color and how it works. I do think, like, the system that we use, using a limited palette of just 2 reds, 2 yellows, and 2 blues, and some white, we can mix almost every color that any human eye has ever seen. So when you start with that limited palette, it can unlock every color, and then it's just, again, it's a matter of, like, where is it in space? Is it a warm or a cool color? If it's a warm color, then there's only 3 colors that are going to make it. If it's a cool color, there's only 3 colors that make that color. And you become more familiar with what those colors look like when they're mixed. Doing the color wheel exercise that we did in our first class, that is super helpful, because it really helps you see how those colors behave and what colors are on the outside of the color wheel, and then what colors work on the inside of the color wheel. So maybe it's time to move on to a different stage of the painting here. Okay, I'm pretty happy with where the painting's at right now. We've got our first real pass completed. We've got all of the colors basically in the right place. Now we just need to refine it. And I think what we've got here is very similar to what she would have seen, Mary Cassatt would have seen while she was working on this painting. That she was really building it up pretty quickly, gets to this stage, and then says, okay, maybe to the little girl who she's painting. You know what? If you need to go to the bathroom, now's a perfect time. Why don't you go to the bathroom, have a little bit of lunch, and why don't we pick this up again at 2 in the afternoon or something? Take a nap, run around, whatever you need to do, because the next little bit, I'm going to need you to be really focused and really still, and that's going to take a lot of concentration, because I'm going to paint your face in detail. I got sort of the basic part of it done, but now I'm going to need you to be focused. So why don't you go off and have some fun, and I'll just clean my brushes, and we'll see you in a couple of hours or something, right? Because she's got everything in the right place, but now she needs to kind of refine it. So, just as her subject is taking a break, I'm going to have a sip of tea. The cream of Earl Grey is the best. You can't have too much of it, but because it's kind of a stronger, odder flavor. But boy, oh boy, it's the best thing out there. So, where should we start next? Let's take a look at the painting. I think I'm just going to go right to to her face, and let's start refining that. So probably what I like to do is go right to the area around the eyes and get a little bit of that done. So what I want to do, I'm going to need to mix another black. I'm going to build my way up from some of the, well, it's hard to say what she's doing here. I think it looks like she's using that orange next. Doing a little outlining with orange. So let's do that. Let's follow her lead. And so it's this orange here. Let's just mix a bit more of it. Our warm red and our warm yellow and a bit of white. And that's kind of neat that she's using that color, because it's going to give that face, there's just these little bits of warmth coming through. You know, it's a little kid. We want that kind of very rosy cheek kind of thing going on here. Okay, so again, we did do a little bit of painting with a brown here. Now I think she's using this orange and being kind of bold with it. So now she's kind of like shaping the face here. so we've got that. Now let's go back to some of our flesh tone. We'll get a bigger brush here. Let's go into this. This is where I add a little bit more blue in there. Oops. So I'm just taking the brush I used to mix this, just going in here, maybe adding a little bit more, just a little bit more blue. And where should we mix this? Let's just do that with some white. Okay. And you know what I haven't used in forever is some slow dry medium. So for a while I was using this a lot in our classes. I haven't used it in a while, but slow dry medium. Oh, where are we? Let's go this way. Is really good for slowing the drying time of your paintings down. And I think I want to do this with this particular painting so that we can kind of mix wet paint into wet paint and just see if we can kind of play with this a little bit. So we haven't really done this in a long time, so this is kind of fun. Oops. So the slow dry medium, it's going to make this paint a little bit more transparent. But this is going to keep this paint wet for maybe till the end of this class, right? We're going to be modifying it as we go. So you can see I'm sort of painting over a bunch of things here. You can see it's a like how transparent it is. It's not like super opaque. Like if I painted the paint as I mixed it before right over this area, it would just it would have obliterated it entirely. Okay, let's add a bit more white to this. Maybe a little bit more warm yellow. Oops. It's a bit more white and warm yellow. Take even more white. Sorry, keep forgetting. I'm looking at my palette, not at the screen when I'm mixing, so. And if I want, I can just also take this, clean my brush off a bit, and because this paint is still wet on that surface, I can kind of blend them in a little bit because of that slow dry medium. Okay, let's take a little bit of red this time. Mix this red into that mixture. And instead, I'm just going to take another brush and just use this to kind of soften. So it's starting to get a little bit, I could probably have put more of that medium in there. Take a little bit more red. Oops, that's a little bit too much. Okay, and let's make a little bit of a slightly darker. So I'm taking some of my blue and mixing that in here, which is going to give me a little bit more of a slightly purpley, more kind of crimson-y kind of red. Now I'm going to go for an even more overt purple. So I'm going to take my warm blue and my cool red. I think this is the first time I used my cool red yet. And make this purple here. You can see I'm using a flat brush like this. Maybe I'll show you a different view. Let's So I'm going to take that same purple, come in here, and try to define where this eye is going to go. Okay. Maybe this needs to come down just a bit. Okay. Okay. Just going to take a second to clean a few brushes. So now her face is starting to kind of emerge from this cloud of brushstrokes. She's painted this faster than I can. I mean, she's one of the greatest human beings to ever live, of course. So, you know, it's but I'm trying to kind of keep up to her pace and trying not to get bogged down. Like when we look at her version, just the brushstrokes are so frantic. Like, it also helps. It's hard to get that kind of urgency when we're just working in a studio like this without the model sitting there. Like if you're painting this painting and there's a small child on a stool, this is maybe like what, a 5-year-old child perhaps. Just anyone who's got children, I've got a 3-year-old child upstairs right now, getting her to sit still for more than 20 seconds is a major task. So she's like, if she can get that child to sit still for any moment at all, frantic painting, like she's probably barely even looking at her palette, she's just dipping it in, and that probably accounts for why some of this paint, let's see if we go back here, you know, it looks kind of messy. These brush strokes are just so wild. So there's that level of urgency. Now, of course, she painted other people with the same sort of approach. So she's clearly taking the style isn't just purely because she's painting a child, but I think it clearly becomes so important for, you know, working with this type of subject for sure. Okay, let's keep going here. The other thing too is I'm allowing this paint, this mixture, to kind of just get a little bit muddy. There's lots of different kind of colors coming in and out of here. This is the one that's got my slow dry medium in it. I'm going to go back to some highlights here. Okay, if I start going down here, I'm going to want to darken that color a little bit. I'm going to take a bit of my white here. Just put it here, grab a little bit of color on there so it's mostly white. So I'm looking for the places where we'd expect to see most of the highlights. Right, these cheeks. Okay, well, let's start to kind of darken back down. We're going to head in the opposite direction. So just taking my brush, going into a slightly darker area. I think that was too far. I'm going to bring some of that back. Purples, let's kind of go halfway with that purple. So I'm just kind of trying to integrate some of the brighter areas that I put in here. Because remember, I'm painting with some slow dry medium in here, so I can kind of paint and blend in a little bit what I've painted. Let's get a bit, so this is a little bit purpley. Let's get a bit more red. let's take even more red. I'm going to look at my sketch here. Man, she did that with such subtlety. It's just, how frustrating it is to not be able to paint like a great artist like that. But let's just wipe some of that away. Okay, we're just going to go back and kind of tinker with things a bit. Just want to get this eyelid, get the shaping the eyes a bit more here. Now that I sort of feel like I've got the face fairly well described, you can see underneath there those darker values. Man, what an incredible artist. Holy smokes. Let's go. I'm going to kind of take a second just to deviate here. I want to get a little bit of this blue. I'm going to take a bit of my medium there. Maybe even take a bit of that blue. I'm going to bring it in here. Okay, so now let's take some brown. You know what, actually, so, where am I here? This painting is frustrating me a little bit, just because how, in many ways, it's very simple, and the simplicity of it makes it hard. In many ways, it's harder because there's nothing to hide. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of take a break from the face and work on the hair for a few minutes. So let's do that here. So there's still some work to do with the face, but I want to switch gears, work on the hair, because partly what could be frustrating me about the face is that the hair's not done, which sounds kind of crazy, but it's so hard to see the face in isolation with the hair totally incomplete that I need to get that done to see the face, you know, because the face, the hair is like the frame, and the frame is very important to the picture, and without it, and there's no point in continuing much longer without getting that complete. So let's dive out here, and we're going to mix a little bit more of our cool yellow and brown. So I'm going to take this brown I had mixed earlier. So this is just, oh, sorry, where is that? In fact, I need to zoom out, don't I? Okay, so I'm taking my brown that I mixed earlier with, this is my warm red, warm yellow, and warm blue. And I'm going to mix some cool yellow into it. The reason why I don't use all cool colors is because I want it to be in the foreground, and so this is mixing some cool color into the warmer color. It keeps it kind of close to the foreground. That's good, but we need some white in here. We need more yellow in there. So we're going to be kind of going back and forth amongst these colors here. I think actually, let's save that. Let's kind of go back to our brown. Looks like I need to get just the brown on its own first, so let's do that. Let's take this brown. In fact, you know what? I'm going to go back to my smaller brush. And this brown is not quite dark enough, so let's take some warm blue. Okay. And we can also use this color to kind of shape the face a little bit. So I'm taking maybe some of the roundness of those cheeks away. Look at that lip. It's going to need to move over a bit. That's interesting. Okay, anyway. Okay, that's getting better. Let's take some warm red and mix this in here. Needs a bit of white. Anywhere else this color? Under her chin. Just going around the outside edge there. So that little bit of that purple and kind of just going over that edge just soften that really dark line that we had there. Okay. And in fact, it's interesting. Her whole face looks turned somehow. Yeah, I'm gonna have to do something with that mouth. I mean, it's funny, like on its own, I don't mind it, but when I look at it compared to the original, it drives me a bit nuts. But let's keep on going with the hair. Take a little bit of white and mix that in here. Okay. Let's go back to our darker brown. Looks like I need to add even more blue. Okay, and then going back to some kind of intermediate browns. After I've kind of staked out the darker and the lighter, kind of come back and just soften the transition between them. Okay. The British Perspective says this painting sold at Christie's for $869,000. John says this one looks intimidating for sure. Pascal says, I give up. I'll go paint my shoes. But John says, hey, Pascal, they say it's about patience, but my oil dries really slow. Pascal says, patience? Where am I going? Where I'm going, there's no patience. How come you're doing it in oil, John? Try water-soluble oils, perhaps? Best of both worlds. British Perspective says she's missing the jawline. Let's see. Missing the jawline. Yeah, we're still working away on here. What I wanted to do was get the hair back into place because it kind of disappeared for a while. And then now I can kind of go back and back into the face now that I've got something a little bit more, the frame here secured for sure. Okay. So, speaking of which, I want to make an adjustment here. So, let's maybe zoom in just a bit. Okay. So, you know, I look at these. I'm just looking at the eye line. That's pretty similar. I think her nose, I've made the tip of her nose come out a little more, so I kind of want to refine this. Also, if I look straight up and down, this is coming out too far. So, we need to kind of just clean that up a little bit. Move that over. Okay, let's get back to those lips now. let's get a bit more white again. And what is she doing with those eyes? Okay, let's see if I can get that. It's just this little bit of little highlight. Okay, I'll take my, oh, I gotta mix a little bit more purple. Take a bit of white. Okay, let's make a black. Actually, let's just use a different brush here. Let's take our cool blue, cool yellow, and warm red. Pretty good. I'm going to take this black. Oops, just it almost looks like a few little bits of eyelashes there. Just put a few of those there. I'm going to clean that part of the eye up. So now I'm starting to kind of look more at my painting as an individual artwork that lives on its own, and just thinking about how it needs to live on its own, and what needs to be there for it to live on its own. I want a little bit of green up here. I'm going to take my cool blue, cool yellow, a bit of white. That's a little bit, I need, where was I mixing this right here? Let's bring our hair back onto. Wow, you can see hers is so much more, like mine is, the contrast is so much more intense, especially in my darker areas. She's got a much more subtle use of color. Expression. Oh my goodness, how do you get that? Let's do a little bit more underneath this eye here. Oh, there you go. It's kind of neat actually to see it like that, and you can see the amount of texture that's on this painting too. I mean, part of me wants to think about darkening this down, giving a little bit more blue underneath, but that's under that painting. So trying to get it now is, you know, a bit of a fool's errand. I need a bit more red. I'm getting very close to being done here, so. Let's just get just a bit more red on here. Okay, let's just take a look here. A little bit more of that button nose. Okay, let me take a second here. What are people talking about? The British perspective is, I'm going to bed soon. It's 3:17 in the morning. Oh my goodness. Okay, now I guess my last little thing is, do I want to put her name in the bottom? Her name, she did write her name down there. It is kind of quickly, kind of messily painted. I think I'm okay without it. Do I want to... I feel like... I just want to play a little bit with the top of that hat a bit. Let's just put... In this instance, I'm just going to use a bit of my matte medium. I could use slow dry medium, but I'm not going to be blending or anything. I'm just literally right at the very end, so I just want a little bit of something to... These paints have started to dry up a little bit, so this is just going to give me a little bit of flexibility to use that paint a bit more. I just feel like it needs to be a little bit darker up here. If this is in fact like a hat she's wearing, it's probably, we're looking at the underside of it, and it's going to be a little bit darker, right? Okay. I think I can walk away feeling pretty good. It's definitely a little bit different. Took me longer than I expected, but has there ever been one that's gone faster than I expected? Okay. So, it's time to do a little side-by-side comparison, see how these two paintings turned out, and maybe you just jumped to this part of the video long after it aired live. So, either way, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you can see when new and future episodes are coming out. I post at least usually every Thursday, and sometimes on a Saturday and on a Tuesday, Wednesdays, etc. There'll be next painting, I think, is on a Wednesday next week. We'll take a look. So you want to be subscribed so you know when those are happening and get updates. If you want to support the channel as little as $1, feel free to make a donation through PayPal, through the Super Chat function here within YouTube. Contact me via email or the Facebook group. I strongly encourage you to join our Facebook group and upload a photograph of your painting there, and in about 3 weeks I'll go through them and give you some free feedback from a professional artist if that's something that interests you. Oh, look at that. There's the British Perspective just donated £5. That's awesome. Thanks so much. Okay, so drum roll, please. There's the two paintings side by side. Now, definitely a little bit different. And different doesn't mean bad, it's just different. I do feel a little urged suddenly here just to take some of this purple. Let's get a bit more of that. Just wanted to... a little something up there. I think overall I feel pretty satisfied. There's definitely, you know, the way that I've done the hair is not quite the way that she done. Like, the confidence that she applied her brushstrokes is just remarkable to me. I know that's why I spent most of the time talking about it before we got really started here. Is it just blows my mind how, you know, just direct and confident. Every brushstroke is kind of in the right place, and if it's not, rather than kind of scrubbing it out, she just paints right over top of it. There's a sense of energy and movement in her painting. I tried to capture that there. I don't quite feel I got there. Like, even just the way that she did I'm calling it like a sun hat up there, you know, to allow so much of that background to shine through or to come through and not cover it up as I've done. The restraint involved while going so quickly is just remarkable. Anyway, let's kind of zoom in here. Maybe not quite that far. And maybe let's go to top left. Yeah, I mean, that kind of annoys me how I couldn't, you know, you can see how she's done that with almost a dry brush. It makes me think like that was done, she's painting the rest of the face and then just wiping the excess paint off in that area. Let's look at the top right. It's a bit more teal. I mean, trying to paint like that. Do I want to try to get any teal on? Nah, let's just call it. Let's just say it's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect, or does it have to get a little teal? I think it might have to get just a bit of teal. Anyway, we're going to fuss on this painting forever. That's cool. I mean, it's getting there. Let's go right to the bottom, or the side here. As I said, you could put her signature in there. You could see it's pretty messy, though. So unless you were to do it much cleaner, and I hesitate just because of how big it is. it could look kind of a little bit odd in that bottom corner, so I'm just decided to omit it. I mean, just before I move on, like, you could just look at how quickly these brushstrokes, the confidence, like, that's just, it's remarkable. What an incredible artist. Let's go over here, bottom right corner. I didn't really spend too much time looking down here. I guess it's more of the blonde hair down there. And then we'll just zoom back in on the face. I don't think I didn't use any slow dry medium in the hair. I did on the face, but I probably should have done that in the hair. That would have allowed for a little bit more blending to happen. So, and you could see I could actually have gone with more white into that yellow and brought it up even more. The only reason why I kind of hesitated is because I also went very dark with my brown. I felt like I had to get darker, 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 and then I kind of went too far. And so now if I add white in here, it's actually going to make those dark areas look even darker because of the way they would contrast. So it's sort of like, you know, if I went brighter, then this would be darker, and then I'd have to kind of go back over the darker areas and lighten them up, and it's just, whoa, keeps going and going and going. In terms of the eyes, you know, one of the things I was contemplating making that just a little bit bigger. Her left eye seems just a tiny bit too small in my painting. I think the expression's pretty close. I think what's remarkable to me is the speed she's painted, and yet the subtlety, like very little definition on that nose. You know, I mean, that was tough for me, and those are pretty subtle gradations of color, and yet she's got that. I think part of that is oil paint and being able to really blend very easily and clean that up if you wanted. But yeah, you can also see that she painted very, like, she had that, remember I was talking about the zones of the face much earlier. So she painted that kind of darker bluey gray underneath there and really did very little over top of it. So you could still see so much. It's almost like an Imprimatura coming through there, right? So that just shows her skill and her familiarity with portrait painting, that she could do that in 3 or 4 quick brushstrokes. Here I've got about 40 of them trying to get to the same place. So she did in 3 or 4 quick brushstrokes, which in maybe 2 minutes tops, that I spent 45 minutes to an hour fiddling around in there. But that's what you get when you look at the great artists of all time. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Did one of that light go out? Or was it always out the whole time? I don't know. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you guys in next week. I'll take the weekend off, I think. I hope. I'm not sure. I'll have to look at the schedule. Have yourselves a wonderful night, everybody. We'll see you, or have a good morning. We'll see you again very soon. Good night, everybody.